Hey, welcome to the Cruz Family Home Brewery and Winery. In this video, we're going to be showing you how you can use the home brewing equipment you already have to make world-class Chardonnay from Brehm Vineyards frozen grapes. Now before we get into this bucket of juice, let's let Peter Brehm show us where this white salmon vineyard fruit comes from.
These are the grapes. When you say you're getting white salmon Chardonnay, these are the place where they're coming from. They have quality. They're not fertilized. The rows are untilled. We use fungicides for mildew and botrytis, but no pesticides. In a beautiful setting in the Columbia River Gorge, looking out across the other side. The White Salmon River is right below us. We have our other dug fir lot going over to where the Columbia River comes in and the White Salmon River comes in at the bottom of those hills.
So I'm here with our 50-pound bucket of frozen Chardonnay juice, and it literally is frozen solid. I picked it up from the freezer today, and just by giving it a little twist like that, you can tell there's no liquid on the inside. Now, depending on how you got your frozen juice shipped to you, it might be in a different stage of the thawing process. And it'll take anywhere between 1 and 4 days for it to dethaw completely. You're going to want to dethaw your juice at about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, or normal room temperature. So before we can start making wine, you need to have already made your beer. The first thing any decent winemaker will teach you is that it takes a lot of good beer to make a good wine. In this case, I'm estimating we're going to spend about 2 hours of actual processing time making this wine. There's going to be about 3 of us here, so that means we're going to need about 48 beers. Alright, welcome back. I'm here with Jenny and Maverick, who are going to help us through the next stage of our winemaking process. So 3 days have passed and our once frozen bucket is now completely liquefied, so we need to transfer that juice into our fermentation carboy. After we do that, we can make 2 adjustments, a lysozyme and an acid adjustment, and then we'll be ready to add our yeast. So now we're going to siphon our liquid juice into our 6-gallon carboy. Now we're going to use a 6-gallon carboy for 5 gallons of juice, because as the fermentation gets going, it's going to kick up a lot of foam, and we don't want that foam getting up over the top and creating a big mess. Alternatively, you can use 2 5-gallon carboys and split the juice between the 2. So this is going to take a little while, and while this is going on, we're going to work on making our adjustments. Before we add our yeast to our juice, we're going to make 2 adjustments. We're going to add tartaric acid, and we're going to add lysozyme. Tartaric acid, which I'm holding here, is used to bump up the acidity of a wine. We know that by adding 3.8 grams of tartaric acid per gallon of juice, we can bump up our total acidity by 0.1%. Now we have about 5 gallons of juice here, so we're going to add about 20 grams of tartaric acid. If that sounds complicated to you, don't worry about it. You can just trust me and add 20 grams of tartaric acid. The second thing we're going to add is called lysozyme. Lysozyme is an egg white isolate that works by breaking down the cell walls of gram-negative bacteria that we don't want. The nice thing about lysozyme is that it doesn't affect gram-positive bacteria like yeast, so we can add it before fermentation. So Jenny's done siphoning out our bucket, but you can see there's still a lot of solids left on the bottom. Most of these solids are cream of tartar. Cream of tartar is the most important thing affecting the acid in our wine, so we're going to want to get all those solids into our carboy. What I'm going to do is just take a hose, put a little water in there, mix it out, and then dump it in. Alright, so now you can see our Brehm bucket is totally empty, and everything that was in here is now inside the carboy. Alright, so now we're ready to make our adjustments. Here's 20 grams of tartaric acid. What we're going to do is just pull out a little bit of juice. Get a good mix going. And then we're just going to dump it on in. Still a little bit left in the glass, so I'm going to take out a little more. Just want to make sure you get all that tartaric acid in there. So we want to add 1.5 grams per gallon of lysozyme. So that's going to mean 7.5 grams of lysozyme, which I have right here. Same thing, we're just going to mix it up with a little bit of juice. Get that good and mixed in there. And then we'll dump it in. Alright, so at this stage we're ready to add our yeast. Now if you want a quick and dirty way of doing it, you can just open your yeast and sprinkle it in there, and you might get fermentation started. A better way of doing it is to rehydrate your yeast. Now because you're all beer makers, I'm assuming you're all familiar with how to do that. We started rehydrating yeast already, and we have it going right here. Now one important difference between winemaking and beer making in this case is that in beer making, while you're trying to get your wort cooler to the temperature of the yeast, in this case the juice is already really cold and you want to get your yeast cooler so that it matches the temperature of your juice. So we're going to achieve that by adding juice to our yeast culture to get it to be more of the same temperature of this. Alright, so now I'm just going to pull out a little bit of juice. Add it to the yeast. And we'll just do this once every 15 or 20 minutes until we get this within 10 degrees of that. And that's the best way to get the fermentation started. So now our yeast culture is 65 degrees and our juice is 60 degrees, so we're ready to add it. So now that we've inoculated our juice, we need to pay careful attention to it. Once we see the first signs of fermentation starting, we need to add our yeast nutrient. But for now, let's just cap it off with an airlock, and we'll come back and check up on it tomorrow. Hey, I'm back. About 12 hours have passed since we added our yeast, and you can tell by the foam and bubbles forming on the surface that fermentation is underway. So at this stage, we're going to add our yeast nutrient. Now it's important to add yeast nutrients because if you don't add them, then the yeast may struggle and produce a chemical called hydrogen sulfide, or H2S. Now H2S is what gives wine that sort of burnt match smell. It's actually probably the most common problem facing both amateur and home winemakers. However, it's easily avoidable by making sure that your yeast have plenty of nutrients throughout the fermentation process. In this case, we're going to use Fermaid K as our fermentation nutrient, and we're going to add it at a rate of 1 gram per gallon of juice. And we recommend adding half of your yeast nutrient at the onset of fermentation and half at the midway point. So right now we're going to add 2.5 grams of Fermaid K to our juice. I've already mixed it up with a little bit of juice, and I'm just going to dump it on in there. Now if you have a hydrometer, you can tell when you're halfway through fermentation by looking at when the hydrometer reaches the halfway sugar level. If you don't have a hydrometer, then you can just kind of estimate. It's definitely best to be on the early side of adding your yeast nutrient for the second addition, because if you add it too late, not only will the yeast not be able to use it, but it'll be waiting in your juice for another microorganism to come eat later. So to be on the safe side, if you don't have a hydrometer, probably add your second addition after 2 or 3 days. So I just added our first round of yeast nutrients to our fermentation, and now we're going to turn our attention to keeping our fermentation at the appropriate temperature, ideally 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Now we're in a subterranean basement down here, and it's always about 55 degrees, so at the onset of fermentation we're at a nice temperature. However, as things get rocking in here, the temperature is going to tend to rise up, and we're going to need to come up with a solution for keeping it cooler. We're probably going to use an ice bath. You might have a mini fridge or a cooling jacket to put around your carboy. If you don't have anything to keep it cool, that's alright too. You're just going to end up with a slightly less aromatic wine, but that might be the style of wine you prefer.